Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to WCS America Premier League. This is Group G. We have just watched a game of Huck versus Crank. We're going to get on into the winners game, though, of Sen versus Crank, and that's going to be a crazy game. But before then, if you haven't checked it out already, we have a pro shop for MLG where you have some awesome attire and gear ready for you to buy, and it's pretty nice stuff too. I mean, this mousepad, I've been loving this mousepad while I'm here.
That's right. A lot of great stuff there. Of course, one thing that you may not have seen if you checked out in the past is the MLG Nike track jacket. That's just one of the many things we have there. Go ahead, check it out during a commercial break, whatever. MLGProShop.com.
The track jacket would be great at this time of year, where it's just, a little bit chilly, but a little bit warm at the same time, so you can just kind of unzip, as soon as it becomes a little bit difficult. But let's take a look at what we've seen so far today. Sen 2-0'd Kapak, and then Huck got 2-0'd by Crank, which is going to put our next game of Sen versus Crank, and then following that is going to be Kapak versus Huck. The loser of that will be knocked out, and then the loser of the next match, Sen versus Crank, is going to go on to fight the winner of Kapak versus Huck.
Of course, that third match, Sen versus Crank, the winner of that advances to the round of 16, along with the winner of the final match of the night. Sen versus Crank is going to be an insanely good matchup because Crank's PVZ is off the charts good.
Off the charts. We don't even have any type of graphic for that right now. I mean, just because
it's off the graphics.
because it goes off the graphics. The graphics would be a chart, and we can't handle that right now. We'd get a server overload. A little bit too much Starcraft for me today. But it looks like our next match is going to be Whirlwind, and it's going to be a pretty good game, I think, for Sen and Crank.
It is. Whirlwind's a very interesting matchup in this PvZ because it's very big and spread out, which means the early aggression from Protoss isn't always quite as effective. It makes airplay great, but also the third is kind of exposed on this map. So it's kind of weird. It's big, so aggression's in weaker way, but it's open and exposed, so aggression can be stronger in that way. Of course, most Protosses opt to play Sky Toss on Whirlwind, and Zergs, of course, unless there's too many Phoenixes around, they love those meta transitions here.
All right, guys, so both of our players have started mining and started building some type of econ unit. For our Protoss player, it's going to be Probes, but he's going to be spawning down here in the bottom left-hand corner. It is Axiom's Crank. And, of course, drones coming out here for our red Zerg player from Team Gamma Bear. It is Sen.
So we just saw Sen go for the triple hatchery before pool the first game against Kapoch. And Whirlwind is the map where I feel like if you're already doing that, it's probably one of the better maps to use that strategy on because your opponent isn't going to scout you as early. Or you're less likely to because there's 4 spawns. So there's a decent chance they'll scout in the wrong direction. Let's see what is Crank doing, though. First pawn, of course, is in his main base, so he could be going for a gateway opening.
And that gateway opening, of course, is what we've been seeing pretty much most Protosses doing. On a map like this, you have a pretty large ramp with a nice little supply depot that's going to help block off. So you can go for either gateway or forge fast expand. Not really incredibly open, exposed, natural there for Protoss, but Protoss have been going for a lot of these gateway expands.
It's definitely something to look out for. On Whirlwind, because it's a little bit longer of a map, the first cell takes a while to cross the map. When Protoss has used those gateway expands, they usually go for a Nexus before any units. And it looks like actually Crank is going to go for a Nexus first here. And this is kind of cool. He built a pylon in his main base, so he would lose no income at all. Just goes build a pylon, get straight back to mining, optimal mineral income, and then he goes for his Nexus. And his second pylon, he's going to build out at his wall to help create that defensive fortress.
Defensive fortress. Brother of the planetary fortress, but not as effective because it doesn't shoot back.
Nope, it just gets in the way.
Just gets in the way.
Defensive fortress. There's multiple variants. There's the the double gateway Psycore. There's the forge gateway Psycore. The triple gateway. Many different options to wall in that front. Of course, the forge is going down as well, so we can get that photon cannon up as soon as the pylon and the forge complete.
If you played fastest map possible and you're playing with a whole bunch of minerals, then you could just start building a whole bunch of nexuses, because they are the strongest structure, and that is how you fend off any type of early aggression. If you're like me in Starcraft Brood War, you put 2 of those down as your wall for some strange reason, and then go Sky Toss.
That's definitely something we didn't see too often in Starcraft Brood War, but
I meant fastest map possible, not in professional play. I did
you
not
know,
expect to see Stork pull out the double Nexus wall in.
I've actually never played fastest map possible. I never got the privilege.
Are you calling me a filthy casual? I think
No,
that's what you're calling me.
no, I'm
right
saying
now.
I wasn't as versatile in my Breed War experience.
Sen going for that triple hatchery, which, you know, we've seen him do before. Going to get that econ up.
Sen is a guy who loves his expansions. You know, there's a lot of these Zergs nowadays are doing this like upgraded Zerg into Ultra style, where they're taking a little faster to get swarm hosts. There's all these kind of like more 2-base focus, tech-heavy Zerg plays. But Sen is a guy who's like, why do I want complex tech units? No, I'm going to make a whole bunch of little guys and just throw them at you until you leave. And that's kind of his style. And that's actually going to work out well on Whirlwind because, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of open areas. You know, if Crank wants to take his third base, if he wants to defend area between a third and natural, it's fairly open, so roaches can be effective.
You know, it's actually a really interesting point is we've seen Sen just go for massive armies of low-tech units, but we haven't seen him go for the massive speedling tech into quick hive. And that'd actually be, you know, somewhat I'd actually expect to see from Sen, but we haven't seen him yet. I mean, granted, we've only seen 2 games so far.
That's true.
So it's possible
That's
he
true.
could be breaking it out in this game, using the map control of those speedlings to grab more and more bases, and turning that into an entire army of Ultralisks.
Stargate going down for Crank.
Air units, Sky Toss, as you were saying before. Pretty good on this map. Do you think we're going to see an Oracle first, or do you think we're going to see Phoenixes?
Phoenixes, yeah. There's against a player like Sen, who there's a pretty good chance he'll get a scout and suspect you're going Stargate. Oracles aren't as common against Zerg. You know, it's more something you sometimes see it against Terran players. But a Zerg player, unless you catch them totally off guard, they should defend an Oracle without a problem. And even if you do catch them totally off guard, they should still probably defend an Oracle. As long as
Queen's pretty good unit.
Queens are pretty good, of course, and as long as you're fast with the drone pool, they can usually recover fairly quickly. Of course, what can be tricky if you catch them off guard with several Oracles, but that's a much more risky type play to try to hide that tech for that long.
And speaking of hiding tech, not hiding the fact that he went for Phoenixes, taking off that first Overlord with the first Phoenix that came out here, it's going to give Sen plenty of time to throw down Spore Crawlers and get ready for this type of aggression. Actually, not throwing down a single Spore Crawler yet.
Of course, until there's 4 Phoenixes, they can't really threaten the Queens too much. So Sen has a little bit more time before the Phoenixes can do too much damage, one just picking off an occasional drone or 2 here or there, which they could actually do even if you have a Spore Crawler, given the level of micro that Crank has.
Crank coming in here, getting a pretty good scout off. He does see the Roach Warren. Yes, he does, as well as the Evolution Chamber in the back of the base. Single Evolution Chamber, so we're only seeing +1 ranged. Going on to that Roach Hydra type composition we saw before.
That's right, of course. The goal of Sen here is going to be to most likely delay Crank's third for as long as possible, and then eventually he's going to have to add in those Vipers in because you don't want to send out Roach Hydra for too long, because he's getting this attack upgrade, it doesn't look like he's intending to transition to Mutilus. More likely, either Vipers or even a potential Swarm Host transition later down the road.
Robo Facility has finished up here for Crank. Now starting to get a couple of those observers out, getting some idea of what's going on the map. Poking in and out with those Phoenixes, being a pesky little Protoss player. Taking out a poor little Overlord as well.
You know, this is the sign of the best Protoss players. You watch Pardine, you watch Crank, you watch these guys. What separates them from your average GM player is that it doesn't matter how much defense a Zerg has, they're always going to use up every single energy on the Phoenix, and it's always going to be killed. The only difference is they can't kill the Queens with a Spore Crawler there, but they're still always going to pick off drones. There's no such thing as a world-class Protoss who won't make those Phoenixes at least do some work for them.
Roach is heading out across the map. Phoenixes are still across the world. They still have to come all the way back here to help defend. Third base is going up here for Sen. Only 3 sentries so far in Crank's army, so this is going to be a little bit difficult to hold off until he gets more warp in.
That's right. Sen may force a cancel, but these Phoenixes are going to start picking off Roaches. With 4 Phoenixes, it takes a single lift to kill a Roach, so you only want to lift 1 Roach at a time. Make maximum use of that Phoenix energy.
Here comes the Mothership Core trying to do so much damage to the Roaches before they get to the third base. And the third base is completely exposed. There's no units there. Crank already knows he's going to have to cancel it, just baiting a little bit more time out of these Roaches so he could get more warp ins before they come to the natural.
That's right. Of course, that Nexus he took not with the intention of holding it against a roach bush, because this area is fairly open, and until the Protoss gets a little bit more supply, it can be very difficult to take on the roaches in the open. Of course, it wasn't like that was a free cancel for Sen, because he lost several roaches crossing the map to those Phoenixes. So if you can force the Zerg to put the roaches out there, you can continually pick them off throughout the game.
Hydra Tech has come out here as well, so these Phoenixes are going to have to start being a little bit more careful about how they're moving across the map. The third base, once again, under siege. A lot of forces out here for Crank that could possibly be taken out. I mean, the Colossus is very exposed here. So many roaches, but some beautiful force fields are actually going to zone those roaches and speedlings perfectly here. So Crank actually takes this pretty well.
He does, not losing that Colossus. He didn't lose a single sentry or single Colossus. Only lost a few Zealots along with canceling a Nexus. A very good trade for Crank. But Sen is going Hive Tech. This would be a great game for Crank if Sen was continually reinforcing with Roaches and or Hydras. But instead, Sen realizing that unless he can kill the key units of Crank, those sentries, those Colossi, or the air units, then if Crank's army will just get too powerful for Roaches and Hydras to deal with on their own. That's why he's going for the Hive Tech to introduce those Vipers.
And that's going to be a really scary composition. We saw him abuse those Vipers before, and he was so good at just baiting his time, waiting for the energy of those Vipers to get to max. Comes in, takes out a couple Colossus, leaves. Gets the energy back up, comes in, takes out a couple more Colossus, and faster than Colossus can be reproduced. So it's very troublesome for the Protoss player to be dealing with that. I'd really like to see how Crank is going to have to answer that.
Crank does losing one Phoenix. Phoenixes, of course, take out Vipers fairly quickly, but the range isn't that insane. So you can use them to definitely make the Zerg be very careful with their Viper positioning. They have to keep them always by the Hydrodus. You see, Crank is actually getting the air attack upgrade, and he's continually adding Void Rays into his composition.
And I think the Void Rays are going to be a really nice touch here. They're going to be able to chew through those roaches much quicker than the rest of the forces here in the Protoss army. And you know what? I actually kind of like this as a decision. Eventually, if he can keep those Void Rays alive, he can get to a critical mass of Void Rays and turn that into his endgame army. But until then, they're just going to be able to kind of punish the roaches if the roaches get into a position where they're going to be in range of the Void Rays, but the Hydras are not going to be in range of those Void Rays.
It's pretty interesting that Sen never took a fourth base, just really focusing on 3 base, which means this late in the game, he really wants to deny the 3rd base of Crank. Of course, Zerg tends to like to be a base up under opponent, so if they're not going to take that 4th base, they're going to be looking to deny the Protoss 3rd base, and Crank is setting up defenses. He knows Vipers could be out there, and he wants to buy as much. Oh, and there come the Templar. Feedback could be instrumental here.
This is a beautiful display of defense here by Crank, throwing down the Time Warp before anything actually even comes towards him. Trying to bait a little bit more time here. Here comes a couple of those roaches now starting to engage. The Void Rays have to be very careful here. As they get into too close a range of those Hydras, they're going to get completely destroyed. A beautiful bunch of Abducts going to actually take out the Void Rays instead of the Colossus. The Vipers still have 1 or 2 more Abducts in them, but so much damage is being done here by Crank to Sen's army, and Sen actually has to retreat.
Oh, and here come in the Phoenixes to try to mop up those Vipers. Sen turns around. It's okay for Sen to lose a lot of his basic units, but he does not want to lose those Vipers. That's why he risks losing a few more Roaches and Hydras to turn around and keep those Phoenixes off him.
Crank took some heavy losses in that engagement, though, 134 to 200 in supply count. So he's going to have to rebuild that army very quickly, as Sen has been keeping a pretty good bank, not that much in the gas side of things, but he's got a very large mineral bank. So he's focusing a lot more on roaches than he's getting than more Hydras.
4th base for Sen just now finishing up. A single Zealot of Cranks. Actually, kind of a veteran. He's got 3 kills there, which is pretty high for a Zealot. He's going to see if he can add to that count, but 4 roaches, they should take him out without a problem.
The Extractor, of course, gains way too much health for that Zealot to actually do too much damage, even though he's a veteran. In StarCraft 2, veterans don't actually do more damage like they do in other games.
Changeling leading the charge, infiltrating the ranks of Crank, seeing his composition. Crank detects it, takes it out, but now Sen knows that Crank's army isn't that big. Roach is coming across the top. There's no Zealots in their path. A beautiful flank by Sen.
And actually abducts those Colossus, but unfortunately actually let those Colossus get a couple more salvos out before they died. But Sen's army completely overrunning everything out here for Crank. 178 to 101 in the supply count. Sen taking a awesome victory in that engagement.
If only had a few more Hydras to deal with those Void Rays. As is, the Void Rays are going to clean up his forces, but taking away probes at a 3rd, and Actually trading pretty ineffectively over here. Just killing Zealots and losing Roaches so fast that Void Ray Force.
But he does get a whole bunch of Roaches to hang out in the third base, denying any type of mining. Only one guy on gas right now. And meanwhile, he's going to use that time to just start picking away at that Nexus. A bunch of Hydras in the production tab, which is going to be able to
going straight for the Nexus. Now deciding to go back and target some Stalkers. Now maybe even going to go for probes here. No, trying to get one more Stalker before he loses those Roaches.
And that was a really great play there by Sen, because now he knows exactly what Crank's army is mostly comprised of, and it's going to be Void Rays, which are the damage dealers. So now he just puts in a whole bunch of Hydras, and his force is going to be incredibly great in taking out that army, as long as he doesn't lose those Hydras to the 2 Colossus that are out there.
Does he have any Vikings left, or Vipers, excuse me, left is a big question. He does. He has 2. That's 4 Abducts on these Vipers. If he can keep them back until he needs to push a Templar of Crank back first. Then once the Templar are pushed back by his ground force, if he can abduct those 2 Colossi, that's pretty much the only 2 units that can threaten his massive Hydroless force.
The Phoenix is trying to get a scout off before the Vipers get in, but some beautiful High Templar feedbacks are going to take out those Vipers before they're actually even useful. And Sen has to start turning around now. He does set up a beautiful concave, running a couple of Hydras in on move command, and actually loses them without doing too much damage. But still, there's just so many Hydras here that Sen is going to take a very nice victory in the middle of the natural and third base gap.
Very smart move by Sen, not wanting to go up that ramp where there's cannons. And of course, as his Hydras get more and more clumped up, the Colossi get much more effective. So he's just going to wait for some more Roaches to be produced. Realizing his Hydras weren't microing the way he wanted them to, is now going to get that Hydra to speed upgrade.
Not waiting for more Vipers, though. He doesn't have any more Vipers on the map, so he's not going to get those key abducts that he's going to need to take out those Colossus. Meanwhile, Crank is popping out more and more of those units that the more that you get, it just exponentially increases the damage of your army. So he's going to have another Colossus and another 2 Void Rays in his army before the next engagement. And that's just going to become very difficult for Sen to deal with.
It really is. One thing to know as the game goes on and the main bases dry out, Sen now will still be mining from 3 different mineral fields because he has the 4 bases, whereas unless Crank can hold this 4th base, he's going to be down to 2 base economy, which is not where you want to be in this situation.
Still, matching bases with Sen is actually going to be really good for Crank. I mean, as we were saying before, being a base up is great, but being on the same amount of bases is just not going to be in his favor, so Crank is going to need to defend once or twice more, but he's going to be in a really good position if he can hold this 4th base.
No Vipers, great Time Warps, great Storms. Crank trading so efficiently with his army, but there may just be too much, not enough beaten away. Sen flanks with the Roaches.
It
Only
looks like
one
the Void
Colossus
Rays
left.
are chewing through all of the Hydras, and he just needs to take out all the Hydras, and the Void Rays are going to be able to take out all of the Roaches, no problem. And it looks like he's actually going to be able to do that. The Void Rays now just have to deal with Roaches, and Roaches don't shoot up. Trying to target down that Nexus, but it's not going to work. There's not enough Roaches here to do that damage, and the Void Rays will clean up these Roaches without any issue. A lot of Vipers coming out, as well as Hydras. Sen going to try and turn the next match into a massive abduct, and then kill those the air units very quickly. But is it going to be enough?
Sen, of course, realizing he was really missing out on those abducts in that last battle, so now he's going to bring them in, but he's got to rebuild all those Hydralists and Roaches as well.
And not only that, but now he's on equal bases with Crank. And this is exactly that position that Crank wanted to be in. He just needed to defend that push, and he did it so well.
Oh, but he also has to defend his 4th base. Can he do it? Roaches now, are they going to dive on a Nexus? No. They're just going to sit here and okay, they're good. They are going to retreat. Well, they were going to sit there and die for a second, and that would not have been good for a sentence. He needs those Roaches to keep the Zealots and the Colossi off of his Hydroless force.
He needs everything he can get right now. Look at this. He has 0 bank, and this is very unusual for a Zerg to be in this position and have 0 bank.
Remember that he hasn't been expanding too fast. He also does have about a 45 supply lead, but he is primarily Roaches and Hydroless, which are very supply heavy.
One Zealot kind of gets into the middle of that group there, kind of realizing
so
he doesn't have any friends, and starts throwing some punches, but that's not a great way to make friends. The Roaches, the Hydras, they instantly turn on him and kill him.
Crank with a very strong composition, behind in food, but insane quality of units there. A lot of Void Rays, a lot of High Templar, and of course a Colossus there, or 2 Colossi there as well.
Now here's the question for a Zerg player. When absolutely everything is what you normally want to abduct, what do you abduct? Apparently a Void Ray and a Colossus is going to be the decision here. High Templar gets some amazing storms that are going to be able to do so much damage to this army. Those Hydras have one tap left on them before they're going to die. The Vipers can't even abduct because it wouldn't even be useful.
There's not enough damage units. So Storms took out every single unit he had that had damage output so fast, the Vipers can't do anything on their own. We're at a situation where Crank has developed this insanely high-tech Protoss army, and really the way to deal with that, yeah, he can't. Not with Roach Hydra.
Not at all, and even then, Crank was denying all of the bases that Sen was trying to grab around the map as well. Just had 2 Zealots take out another hatchery. It got canceled, and then the drone died as well. So
those storms were just so amazing there by Crank in that last battle. Just totally dismantled the Roach Hydra force of Sen. Pretty much everything died there. Time Warp Storms. Crank's... We just had so much AoE.
Yeah.
And then the units that weren't AoE were Void Rays, which just take down single targets so fast as well. So an extremely high-tech composition he spent the whole game developing, and Sen spent the whole game using a low-tech composition trying to deny the third base over and over again, and he was never able to really take down that third base.
And so that was some really great mechanics coming out there from Crank. In that battle, those Void Rays were not focusing on Roaches, which they do extra damage for, towards. They are taking out the Hydras. They shift-clicked all the Hydras, so they are focusing down those Hydras as soon as possible, because once the Hydras are gone, there's nothing that shoots up, and those Void Rays are able to just have free reign on the rest of the forces there. So not using their bonus damage, but just killing the things that can or the only things that can kill them back. But anyway, guys, we're going to get into game number 2 here, but we're going to go to a commercial break, so stay tuned.